we will learn the basics of probability. So first off, probability is a numerical value that describes the likelihood of something occurring, and it can only be in between 0 and 1. So 0 would mean it's impossible to occur, and 1 would mean it's certain to occur. So say we had this jar here of red M&Ms, and we wanted to know the probability of getting a red M&M. So to write that in statistical notation, we would say the probability of, the parentheses means of, getting a red M&M. So we're going to say probability of getting red. And this would equal 1. Because there's a 100% chance of getting a red M&M if there's only red M&Ms in the jar. Now say we wanted to know the probability of getting a blue M&M. We would write the probability, or parentheses, and then blue. And for this one, the probability would be 0 because there's no chance of getting a blue M&M in this jar of red M&Ms. So the 1 would mean it's certain to occur, 100% chance of getting a red M&M. The 0 would mean it's impossible. There's 0% chance of getting a blue M&M if they're all red. So how can probability be presented? It can be presented as a decimal. So decimal form 0.5. It could also be presented as a fraction, so 1/2. And it also can be represented as a percent, so we can say 50%. So it could be decimal, fraction, or percent form. Now that we know what probability is, we need to learn about a sample space. So sample space is a list of all possible outcomes. So say we were flipping a coin, and the two possible outcomes for flipping a coin would be heads and would be tails. And when we write sample spaces in statistics, we put them in curly brackets. So our sample space would be heads and tails. So that would be our sample space for flipping a coin. Now sometimes we want to see if an event is unusual or unlikely. So when events are considered unusual or likely, that means there's a less than 5% chance of them happening. So less than 5% chance. And to write that the statistical way, we would say the probability of our event, we can just call the event A, we would want that to be less than 0.05. So if our probability or chance of occurring is less than 5%, that means it's unusual or unlikely. Now flipping a coin, the chance of getting heads is 50%. So chance of getting heads is not unusual or unlikely. So the formula for calculating the probability event is just the number of times A occurs over the number of elements in the sample space. So say we're looking back at our flipping a coin, and say we wanted to find the probability of getting heads. Now, since heads, if we look at our sample space, our heads occurs 1 time. So the chance of getting our A, our heads, is 1. And then we need to know the total number of elements in the sample space. So if we look at our sample space, there's heads, there's tails, there's 2 total. So that means it's going to be 1 over 2. So there we get our probability of getting heads when we flip a coin is 1/2, or we can say 0.5, which would also be the same as saying 50%. So you can represent the probability of getting heads any of those ways. So to show you what this looks like visually, we'll go over here to, this is called seeing theory. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip a coin. So this is what we got over there. We had our true probabilities. The true probability was a 0.5% chance we got heads and a 0.5% chance we get tails when we flip a coin. So now we're going to go ahead and do an experiment here, and we're going to flip a coin. So say we flip a coin once. Now our observed outcome was we got heads. Now if we flip the coin again, we can say this time we got tails. So these ones line up with our true probabilities. Now if we keep flipping the coin, we can see the probabilities will change as we go. And the thing about probability is if we flip the coin enough times, so say we had it, here we have flipped it 277 times. As we flip it more and more times, the observed outcomes will become closer and closer to the true outcomes. So we can say when we flipped it 305 times, the outcomes matched up 50-50 to our true probabilities. So that's what we're trying to do with probability. We're trying to figure out the chances that it should happen, so that way when we're actually observing the outcomes, we can get a good guess of what will actually happen in real life. And that is an introduction to the basics of probability.